Imagine spending your entire childhood believing you were unwanted. That every laugh at the dinner table, every family photo, every Christmas morning was a reminder that you didn't belong. That was my life, until one day I uncovered a secret buried for nearly 2 decades. A secret that changed everything and gave me the sweetest revenge I never saw coming. This is the story of how I went from being the burden nobody wanted to finally finding where I truly belong. If you've ever felt overlooked, betrayed, or underestimated, you're going to want to stick around for this one. Hit that like button, subscribe, and buckle up, because this is one of the most powerful stories of justice and self-discovery you'll hear today. My name's Landon, and for as long as I can remember, I've been an outsider in my own family. I was adopted as an infant by Robert and Ellen, a well-off couple living in Omaha. On paper, it sounds like a dream, right? A big house, 2 foster siblings, stability. But the truth? From my earliest memories, I could feel it. I wasn't really one of them. I had dark brown hair and blue eyes that didn't match anyone else's. And more than that, there was this distance, a constant reminder that I wasn't theirs. Christmas mornings, they'd all huddle together for photos, while I stood just outside the frame. Birthday parties, my gifts were smaller. My name, sometimes, wasn't even on the cake. I used to tell myself I was imagining it, that I was paranoid. But then, I overheard them one night. "He owes us," Ellen whispered, her voice sharp and cold. "We didn't want another kid. Robert only did it because he had to." I was 8 years old, and in that moment, something inside me broke. I spent years trying to earn their love. Straight A's, perfect attendance, quiet obedience. I thought, maybe, just maybe, if I worked hard enough, they'd finally see me. But nothing changed. My siblings, Eric and Hannah, treated me like an intruder in their home. Eric mocked me for being the charity case. Hannah ignored me completely. I remember making a bracelet for Hannah when I was 10. I spent hours weaving it, thinking she'd love it. When I gave it to her, she tossed it into the trash without a word. That night, I cried silently under my blanket, making sure no one could hear. I thought the loneliness would swallow me whole. But there was one person who kept me alive: Grandpa Henry. Every summer, I'd escape Omaha and spend a few weeks on his small farm. And for those short moments, I felt like I mattered. Grandpa taught me how to fix cars, grow tomatoes, and even sing old folk tunes on the porch at night. One evening, when I was 12, I asked him, "Grandpa, why don't they love me?" He paused, his weathered hands resting on the old wooden table, and looked me straight in the eye. "Landon, you're the best thing that family doesn't know how to cherish. Don't ever let your kindness depend on how they treat you." I didn't know it then, but those words would save me. Sometimes, though, Grandpa would ask me unusual questions. About my birth. About my real mother. Once, while sorting old photos, he stared at one picture for a long time before slipping it back into his pocket. When I asked, he just said, "There are stories you don't know yet, son. One day you will." I didn't understand then, but that photograph, I would come back to change everything. By the time I was 16, the emotional distance at home had turned into outright hostility. Eric constantly called me the outsider. Ellen barely looked at me. Robert just existed in silence. For my 17th birthday, I got a single envelope. Inside was a $5 gift card and a sticky note that read, "Don't spend it all in one place." I laughed bitterly, but that night, as I sat alone in my room, something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to keep begging for love that was never coming. When I turned 18, I left Omaha behind. I got a scholarship to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and moved into a tiny apartment near campus. It wasn't much, but for the first time in my life, I could breathe. I worked 2 jobs, studied finance, and poured everything into building a future for myself. I sent letters home at first, updates, postcards, hoping maybe they'd care. But most were left unanswered, and eventually I stopped trying. The only connection I kept was with Grandpa Henry. Every summer, I still went back to the farm, finding strength in his quiet presence. And then it happened. One summer evening, Grandpa and I sat on the porch, sipping lemonade as the sun dipped below the horizon. He handed me an old, worn photograph. A young woman, dark hair, bright blue eyes, just like mine. This, Grandpa said softly, his voice cracking, is your mother, Clara. I froze. Grandpa took a deep breath, and the weight of decades seemed to settle on his shoulders. Landon, there are things I should have told you long ago. Clara, he told me, was his daughter, my biological mother. When she was young, she fell in love with a poor musician named David, but her wealthy family disowned her for it. She got pregnant. Alone, scared, and under immense pressure, she gave me up for adoption. Grandpa had convinced Robert and Ellen to take me in, thinking it would give me a better life. Tears stung my eyes. You knew all along, and you let me stay there. He nodded slowly, guilt flooding his face. I thought they'd love you. I thought I was doing right by you. But I was wrong. And then, he told me something I never expected. Clara had been searching for me. For over 10 years. She lived in Seattle now, successful, independent, and desperate to find the son she lost. I spent the next few weeks in a haze. Anger. Confusion. Hope. Finally, I decided I needed closure. Before meeting Clara, I went back to Omaha. Back to Robert and Ellen. I'll never forget the moment I told them everything. The photograph. The truth. Clara. Ellen scoffed. So what? She dumped you. We raised you. And you'll always just be the adopted kid in this family. Grandpa, who had come with me, slammed his hand on the table. His voice thundered like I'd never heard before. Don't you dare diminish this boy. You had one job, to love him, and you failed. For the first time in my life, I saw Ellen speechless. I walked out that door and didn't look back. A week later, Grandpa and I boarded a flight to Seattle. I didn't know what awaited me. Anger, rejection, love. But for the first time in my life, I felt in control of my story. When the plane touched down and the skyline came into view, Grandpa squeezed my hand and whispered, "This is where the healing begins, son." And as we headed toward Pike Place Market, I knew I was about to meet the woman who gave me life. And maybe Seattle's morning air smelled like fresh rain and new beginnings. Landon stood on Clara's balcony, overlooking the city lights fading into daylight. He clutched a cup of coffee with trembling hands, replaying last night's reunion in his head, the hug, the tears, the overwhelming flood of emotions. But peace was still far away. Landon wasn't just reconnecting with his birth mother. He was rebuilding himself. And somewhere deep inside, a storm was brewing. Years of rejection, quiet humiliation, and constant reminders that he wasn't really family had left scars that refused to fade. Grandpa Henry stepped onto the balcony, his slow footsteps creaking on the wood. Grandpa Henry softly couldn't sleep. Landon, without looking away, how do you sleep when your whole life was a lie? Grandpa Henry sighs, it wasn't all a lie, son. But I know, it felt like one. Grandpa rested his hand on Landon's shoulder, a grounding weight. Grandpa Henry, the truth is a heavy thing, Landon. But it's also a key. What you do with it, that's where your power begins. Those words stuck with Landon. Power. For the first time in his life, he had it. 2 weeks later, as Landon settled into his new job at Thornton Enterprises, his phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Ellen, his adoptive mother. Subject, we need to talk. Landon, I've been thinking about everything that happened when you came by. I didn't handle it well. Things have been difficult since you left. Please call us. Your father isn't doing well. We want to talk. Landon's chest tightened. For 20 years, Ellen had barely acknowledged his existence, and now she suddenly needed him. He read the email 3 times before setting his phone down. No reply. Not yet. That night, over dinner, he told Clara and Grandpa about it. Clara, hesitant, do you want to go back? Maybe talk to them. Landon, shaking his head, not yet. They only want me now because they see what I'm becoming. Grandpa Henry, grinning faintly, let him wait. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is silence. Over the next 3 years, Landon worked relentlessly. He started at the bottom, crunching numbers as a junior financial analyst. But Landon wasn't just good at his job, he was brilliant. His strategies saved the company millions, and eventually, Thornton Enterprises CEO personally promoted him. By 27, Landon wasn't just successful. He was one of the youngest executives in the company's history. He bought his own condo overlooking Elliott Bay, sent Grandpa Henry on his dream fishing trip, and helped Clara expand her growing business empire. And while his career soared, his adoptive family's silence grew louder. No birthdays, no congratulations, no acknowledgement. Until one day, they came crawling back. It was a rainy Sunday evening when the knock came. Landon opened the door and froze. There they were. Ellen, Robert, Eric, and Hannah, standing awkwardly in a hallway like strangers. Ellen nervously twisting her hands. Landon, can we come in? Clara stepped into the room, her expression cold as steel. Landon said nothing but stepped aside. They sat in uncomfortable silence until Ellen finally spoke. Ellen whispering, We made mistakes. We should have treated you better. I was wrong. We were wrong. Robert looked down, avoiding eye contact. Eric crossed his arms, muttering something under his breath. Hannah just stared at the floor. Landon, calmly, You didn't make mistakes, Ellen. You made choices. Choices that told me I was never really your son. Ellen's lip trembled. Landon, do you know what it's like to grow up in a house where everyone treats you like furniture? Where your birthday feels like an inconvenience? Where you overhear your parents saying they owe you nothing? Silence. Landon, leaning forward, now you want forgiveness because your lives are falling apart? You want a son when it's convenient? No. Eric scoffed. Eric, snapping, you think you're better than us now because you've got money? Landon turned his gaze to him, his voice calm but sharp. Landon, no, Eric. I'm not better than you because of what I have. I'm better because I chose not to become you. Clara reached over and placed a hand on Landon's arm. Clara, firmly, I think it's time for you to leave. They left in silence, their faces pale, their pride shattered. Landon closed the door and leaned against it, his chest rising and falling. For the first time in his life, he felt free. A year later, word reached Landon that Robert's business had collapsed. Bad investments, lawsuits, and mounting debts had gutted everything. Eric, the golden child, had dropped out of grad school after being caught plagiarizing. Hannah had moved states away, cutting contact entirely. And Ellen? She sent one final letter. I know we don't deserve forgiveness, Landon, but I hope one day you find peace. Landon folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, unread. Years later, on Landon's 30th birthday, Clara threw a surprise celebration at her home in Seattle. The balcony was strung with golden lights, the air filled with laughter and soft music. Grandpa Henry sat proudly at the head of the table, telling one of his old farm stories. Clara raised her glass and looked at her son. Clara, voice trembling with love, Happy birthday, Landon. You are, and always have been, my greatest gift. Landon looked around at the faces of people who chose to love him. Clara, Grandpa, his colleagues, and friends. For the first time, he wasn't the outsider. He was home. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you. It's becoming everything they said you couldn't be. Landon didn't just prove them wrong. He built a life filled with love, success, and belonging. And that, my friends, is the sweetest justice of all. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and drop a comment below. Have you ever walked away from toxic people and found your true happiness? And of course, subscribe for more life-changing stories like this one.